So that's why we're here this morning, and I want to once again thank Tony Zappia for having the passion to convene an event like this. And so without any further ado, and knowing that I and my wife were guests at his wedding, I now have great pleasure in inviting Tony Zappia to come to the podium and introduce our guest speaker. Tony.
Good morning all, and can I add my personal welcome to each and every one of you, and thank you for taking time out in your busy schedules to be here for this forum. Can I also acknowledge Mr. Vikram Madden, who's representing Hugh Van Lee, Lieutenant Governor of South Australia, and also Chairman of the South Australian Multicultural and Ethnic Affairs Commission. Lynn, I want to thank you also for being here today as moderator. I've known Lynn a long time, but can I say I really could not think of a better person to be here in that capacity today. And you would have got a glimpse and a snapshot of just who Lynn Arnold is just from his opening remarks. And it is indeed terrific to have him not only here, but promoting the very issues that I'm hoping might emerge as a result of today's discussion. And lastly, can I thank Terry Williams and the team from the Ingle Farm Baptist Church who use this venue every Sunday and have been so terrific in helping us organise it for today's forum. So Terry, to you and your team, wherever you are, thank you very much. My job is to welcome and introduce Kevin Rudd. Kevin Rudd needs no introduction. Kevin Rudd is known throughout Australia and in fact throughout the world. And he's known because he's been one of our leaders in this country for many, many years. What is not terribly well known, and you might pick up again just his in-depth knowledge of this in his own address to you in just a moment, is that Kevin understands how faith shapes values, shapes culture, and shapes the individual identity of each and every one of us. He also understands how faith and an understanding of faith can not only bridge communities together, but can overcome prejudice and fear throughout the community. As a member of the Standing Committee on Migration of the Parliament, and the committee has just concluded an inquiry into multiculturalism in this country, can I say I'm very much aware and conscious of the importance of bringing communities together to engage in regular dialogue so that we can indeed understand each other and live in a much more harmonious community. That is what today is all about. It is a step in trying to achieve that, and to get the discussion going, can I formally welcome to the seat of Makin, welcome to South Australia, and introduce the Honourable Kevin Rudd.
Thanks very much, Tony and Lynn, and all our other distinguished guests who are here this morning from local government and representatives of the Lieutenant Governor, and for you who are representatives of the community of faith here in the Free Settler Colony. Those of us who come from criminal parts of the country are trying to always arrive in South Australia with a certain degree of intimidation. In fact, when you become Prime Minister of this country, a funny thing happens. Anyone here from the Latter-day Saints, by the way? Okay. Now, good friends from Latter-day Saints then roll up to you and say, well, Mr. Rudd, you're now Prime Minister, we're going to undertake an examination of your family tree. Oh, it's terrific, I say, that's wonderful. Off you go. And then a year or so later, they come rolling back in the door with this finely bound volume. And you thank them very much, but you notice a certain sort of pallor to their complexion as they've finally done the research as to where I came from. I had assured them that I was of vintage convict stock, Second Fleet, 1790, Sydney Cove, and therefore they should expect no surprises. And they said, Mr. Rudd, that's true. but when we undertook the family tree analysis, we discovered you had 5 convicts in your family tree. So thank you to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day for confirming to the entire nation the absolute criminality of my background. Some have said an appropriate preparation for a career in vocation. Thank you, Lynn, for that kind introduction. And your own reflections, including my recent interest in New Testament Greek. I know now 2 words in New Testament Greek, and they are the first 2 words of the first chapter of Luke's Gospel. And that's what I was about to say before he announced to all of you that I have now mastered the language. So I wish to place all that record, and before anyone tests me in my knowledge of classical Greek, which is virtually zilch. Classical Chinese may be, New Testament Greek, no. Or at least not yet. A long ways to go. Well, thank you for the warm welcome here this morning, and I'd acknowledge Tony again particularly for a guy who really feels deeply about his community. I've known him for a long, long time, and because of his period in local government, he has an instinctive feel for this community. And you can tell when members of Parliament care for their community and when they have an academic interest in their community. In my experience, this guy actually cares about this community. It's where he's had his being, not just his early political formation, but his business life as well and his family life. So, Tony, we need more folks like you in the Parliament of Australia. Now, we're going to have a dialogue here this morning about the whole question of interfaith and how we shape Australia's future. I'll talk for a bit, but then primarily it's a dialogue with all of you. Let me get a sense though of who's here in the room. Who here is from the Catholic tradition? Okay, good to see you all. You can stand up if you like, madam, that's fine. We bear in mind our Catholic brothers and sisters, particularly at this time, as the processes for the election of a new pope are underway in Rome. Apart from Lynn, anyone here from the Anglican tradition? Okay, good to see you all. Thank you. And the Yarning Church folks, are they here? Good to see you all. Sons and daughters of Wesley and others. The Presbyterians, are they here as well? Continuing Presbyterians. What about Baptists and Church of Christ? You folks are here? Well, this is a Baptist church. So thank you for those of you from the Baptist community for making this wonderful facility available. Others from the Orthodox traditions. Good to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. Other Christian traditions that I haven't mentioned, Latter-day Saints, Lutherans, okay, that's why I've said others to nominate. Yeah. And yourselves? Salvos, good to see you. Thank God for the Salvos. And we approach almost 500 years since Luther's initial protest in 1517, so an important period in history. Others in the Christian tradition, Latter-day Saints I've acknowledged. Yes? Sorry? Lutherans, yeah, I mentioned Luther before. Now, in terms of other non-Christian traditions, we have people here from the Muslim community, I hope. You can see some of our friends up the back. Welcome, it's wonderful to have you here with us today. And we welcome all of our Muslim brothers and sisters for being with us and sharing this occasion. Anyone here from the Jewish tradition that I should acknowledge? Others from the Buddhist tradition? Good to see you. Wonderful to have you here as well. Do we have Baha'is who are with us today? Good to see our friends from the Baha'is. Do we have other faith traditions which I have failed to mention? Hindus. Thank you, our Hindu friends who are here as well. Good to have you. Any others? We are a diverse mob. And it's one of the very good things about being part of the Australian family. Because I think the good thing about this country in the 21st century is how we don't just tolerate diversity, but we embrace diversity. Let me reflect to you what the most recent census data said about where we come from in different religious traditions. Those who belong to various Christian traditions, according to the census data, we are now about 61% of the nation. The next largest group are those who profess no religious belief at all. They represent now 22.3% of the country. Our Muslim friends represent about 2.5% of the country's population, according to the census data. Our Hindu friends about the same. Our Buddhist friends, according to my data, about the same as well. And then there are other smaller groups. And so that's something of a snapshot in terms of who we are as an Australian community, and based on your responses, who you are as a local community of faith and of faiths. I think the first point I'd like to reflect on with you this morning is this. Whether people like it or not, and having served myself as Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Australia, around the world today, so many of the views which we formally say are political and or foreign policy views are shaped by the different faith traditions of those particular countries and communities. It is impossible, for example, to go and spend time with my good friend, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, the President of Indonesia, and not have some passing conversation about the state of Islam in Indonesia. That is normal and natural. Though Indonesia is a country, 10% of whose population is Christian, and by and large these communities live very peacefully together. I spend quite a bit of time in the Middle East, and it's impossible, for example, to meet with our friends from the Gulf states and without talking about the current divide in Islam between Sunni and Shia Muslims. If you go to the United States and you speak to the members of the United States Congress, and the very large grouping which meets as the Congressional Prayer Breakfast, both Catholic and Protestant, again there are profound ways in which religious beliefs affect people's ultimate political views. And then you go to the other faith traditions as well, and the same happens in one form or another. It's one of the reasons why across the world today, those who say there shall be no interconnection between religion and politics, I think in many ways are trying to deny a reality which exists, and that is faith exists. People of faith represent, frankly, the largest slice of the people in the world today. People of multiple faiths. We mentioned before the Catholic communion, 1.2 billion Catholics around the world out of a total world population of 7 billion today. This is not a small group of human beings, it's quite a large group of human beings. A very large number of Hindus in the world today. I imagine of almost a similar order of magnitude given the population of India and the Indian diaspora around the world. And so it is also with Buddhists. The community of faith is very, very large. In all of its different confessional traditions, it is very, very large. So it becomes very difficult if you simply say to the communities of faith around the world, will you please just park those views to one side, we're now going to have an exclusively secular conversation. Now, in a Western Christian tradition, post-Enlightenment, 21st century, that may be possible up to a point. But across the world and across all confessional traditions, let me tell you, it's not really a practical possibility. Given that reality then, the groundwork that we face is as follows. How then do we engage with these different faith traditions in a way which is productive, by which I mean promoting harmony and peace rather than promoting discord and war? Because we all know in the history of faiths, and Lynn just mentioned his work on the Inquisition, not just in Spain but across Europe, that the faith traditions right across the world have produced appallingly bad things in human history, as well as some of the most spectacularly good things in human history. And that is the complex reality we also face. Principle number one, therefore, is a deeply human characteristic, whether it exists or whether it does not, in a particular human being, frankly, counts for all. And that is respect. That is to respect another's faith tradition, or to respect another's non-faith tradition, those who have reached a conclusion through their own processes of why they don't believe in what we in faith traditions might call God, albeit by different names. Respect is therefore axiomatic. And if there is one great emerging advance across many faith traditions across the world, and most faith traditions across the world, it is a basic attitude of respect. We can all point to the examples where that's not occurring. We all know where, in fact, intolerance is bred and breeds again and produces violence. But number one requirement is respect. And respect means not just a passive tolerance, but actually a respect for difference. And as Lynn said before, all traditions see but through a glass dimly. If it was not that way, frankly, we would have it all laid out in black and white for us from A to Z. It would be nothing to be discussed, debated, or speculated upon. So respect is not just passive tolerance, it's respect for diversity and therefore an ability to hear what other ancient faith traditions have produced by way of their understanding of, let's call it, ultimate realities. For example, if we look at the Hindu tradition, which is many millennia years old, it has conceptions not just of the divine, but also the ethics of human behaviour, which are driven by civilizational experiences vastly different to those that we've experienced in what we might call the collective West. The same with Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism, and how it evolved in 5 centuries before Christ. And through a mystic, a Hindu mystic, as he began, before he undertook the Great Migration and found most of his followers, in fact, and let's call it the communities of wider East and Southeast Asia. Each of these faith traditions, therefore, does not just deserve, I'm just watching this thing upend itself, does not just deserve, I'll risk it, does not just deserve passive tolerance, but an active respect. Because in the accumulated wisdoms of these faith traditions, there's much for us all to learn. I suppose I have my own self a view that it would be passing strange if there was some divine monopoly on a particular piece of language. If we accept the proposition of the existence of an ultimate reality, can you imagine that ultimate reality having a debate about what the ultimate reality should be called in the English language, in Hindu, or in any other language? And so therefore there is much to learn. And that has been, I think, one of the great enrichments of my own life experience as well. Which brings me to my second point. The second point is this: if you look at these enormous faith traditions as they extend across the world today, and most particularly here in this Asian hemisphere, where we are 3 billion plus people, of whom we are nearly 23 million people, 60% of whom are Christian, it's important to understand context. Even though the Christian church is growing in many parts of the region as well. The Philippines, it's very strong. In China, it's exploding as well. But across this wider region of ours, it reinforces the need for those of us from the Christian tradition, but all faith traditions, to work on a common project, which is this. What are the deep values we in fact have in common? There are many academic research projects underway in the world today which are engaged in this very question. If you were to reduce the great faith traditions to essential core elements of ethical beliefs and ethical values, irrespective of what language is used to define the ultimate reality, the great discovery is that those of us within the Christian tradition who say, well, what is Christianity all about? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul and your strength, and love for thy neighbour as thyself. You'd be surprised to learn, those of you who haven't immersed yourself in other faith traditions, that in fact these core tenets, what we describe as uniquely Christian, are in fact alive in most of the faith traditions of the world. Therefore, understanding a common language, a common discourse on the question of the common values and common ethics of different faith traditions is in fact the next core principle for how you start building a harmonious world. And therefore the various interfaith commissions, the various interfaith dialogues, interreligious dialogues on these questions are yielding enormous fruit. In my time as Foreign Minister, I spent some time with an association called the Alliance of Civilizations, the AOC, It's a little bit like the Parliament of Religions, which some of you may be familiar with, or associated interconfessional bodies right across the world today. And there are many, many projects which these are engaged to reduce down core sets of ethical beliefs to something which frankly transcends that which we would normally say is the religious divide across these faith traditions. And often these come down to core questions of treating your neighbour as you would treat yourself. And if you simply took that principle seriously, if I took that principle seriously in my daily life, we would transform the world tomorrow. It is about as profound and as simple as that at once. The third thing is this. When we see in our wider communities anyone invoking a piece of religious belief as an invocation to action against others of a different religious belief, we have a common responsibility as human beings to simply say no. If there is one huge lesson from history, and here I speak from the Christian tradition, but I'm familiar with others, Christianity extinguishes itself when it invokes the name of God to in fact inflict pain, suffering and death on others. For my sins, I'm now reading the history of Tudor England, which is essentially the origin of the English Reformation. We've mentioned Luther's efforts in 1517 in Protestant Germany as it emerged. The English Reformation, different again, in fact different again to, let's call it, the Calvinist Reformation. But the bloodshed of Tudor England, as we swap from one monarch to the next, from the early form of Protestantism of Henry VIII to the more Calvinist Protestantism of Edward VI, then to the Catholic Counter-Reformation of Mary, to the Protestant Counter-Reformation of Elizabeth I. The bloodshed of this period is extraordinary. And if you look more broadly, for those of us not educated in the tradition of the English Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Counter-Reformation, but more broadly of the wars of religion across Europe, between Luther's Reformation in 1517 and the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, a third of the population of Europe, of Northern and Central Europe, were killed in the wars of religion, murdered. And so when we Europeans, or those of us from European extraction, say to our brothers and sisters across the world from different faith traditions, we come to these questions with clean hands, we don't. Then of course there's the wider confessional, interconfessional disputes and conflicts that we are familiar with in human history, the Crusades of which the Crusade stands out as one extraordinary example, and in fact the Inquisition, particularly by Christians against Jews, being another. So when we look at the history, there are so many sobering lessons. And so if we are to learn anything from history in the 21st century, the injunction surely is this: when anyone in our midst, of whichever faith tradition, stands up, directly or indirectly, and invokes an act of intolerance, or let alone an act of violence against someone from a different faith tradition, that is where we have a collective ethical responsibility to say no, and under no circumstances. Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and a fellow I got to know in recent years as well, has set up his own Interfaith Commission, for the simple reason that, having served for nearly a decade as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he concluded that in terms of the future of international relations, this interfaith dialogue across the different faith traditions and between them was actually foundational to dealing with some of the entrenched problems we still face in the Middle East today, but in other parts of the world as well. It is therefore not just an abstraction. It is therefore a process of continuing dialogue at an international, national and community-based level, which brings into focus the three things I mentioned before: respect for different faith traditions, understanding the commonalities which are spread across them in terms of a set of ethical precepts, and beyond that, an invocation to us all that when religion is used as a banner to invoke violence against someone else, collectively all people of faith should unite around a single banner at that point and say no. And so that is the work which I believe is critical for the world at large today. It is not the exclusivity of what international relations is about. Having been a practitioner of this for more years than I care to remember, it is one part, but an important part. The global economy is another part, global politics, pure and simple, is another part, global strategic relationships, the military balance, these are other parts, the great challenges of climate change are other parts. But we are blind if we do not acknowledge this part as well, because faith and different faith traditions shape cultures, cultures in turn shape ethical precepts, and ethical precepts in turn shape human behaviour. And unless we are mindful of that and have the software to deal with it in our human and community and national lives, then we're going to be the poorer for it. Let me turn in my second set of remarks just to Australia itself and our own circumstances. I mentioned before where the census data stands. I think one of the great hidden strengths of Australia is our embrace of diversity. In this country, where literally we come from 192 countries from around the world, and if I was to do a name call of countries around here this morning, we'd probably at least get to 40 or 50. We are often blind to the fact of what enormous strength we have in our diversity. Let me take this one step further. In Australia, by and large, we don't have a program out there which says, this is how we're going to make you or turn you all into Australians. Here is the 5-step guide to becoming an Australian. Do this, do that, do this, do that. Attend to this various set of public beliefs, public functions, wear this, wear that. Many other countries do this. They have formal, shall I say, processes which often rub up against people who come here from different cultural traditions. Let me put it to you in these terms. The fact that by and large we in Australia don't do that is one of the key hallmarks and reasons for our success as a multicultural society. Let me explain that one step further. How many people here are first generation from abroad who've come here in their current generation? Okay, that's about a third of the room, or maybe a quarter. My own experience in my own communities in Queensland is that when people come, they're proud of where they've come from, and they want to continue the traditions of where they have come from. That in part will be passed on to the second generation, but with a very creative admixture of all the kids they've just gone to school with who come from everywhere else, including what still remains the Anglo-Celtic majority in this country. And so by the time you get to the second generation, you see this extraordinary, what I think is, degree of comfort between where I've come from and where I now live. By the time you get to the third generation, people usually have forgotten everything. And that is, well, who am I and where have I come from? I vaguely remember as a child standing around a piano in a country hall in rural Queensland where I grew up, as my mother's Irish Catholic side of the family would sit around the piano and sing the rebel songs of the Irish protest movement from the 1890s to the 1910s and 20s to the Easter Rising. And I had not a clue what all this was about, and neither did my mum really, but it was basically a couple of generations before her. And at the time of the Easter Risings, anyone here from Ireland? The time of the Easter Risings in 1922 from memory, then these were felt keenly right across the Irish Catholic diaspora across the world. And so the rebel protest songs were part of Irish identity at home and around the world. By the time we got to the 1960s and 70s, when I was a kid in short pants, and these were being sung, they frankly didn't mean a whole lot to me, though problems at that stage still continued big time in Ireland. That is my small anecdote as to what I think it is like for the translation of one generation of Australians into the next. This is a good thing. Therefore, when people come to this country, I'm all for people doing whatever they want to preserve the cultural inheritances they've brought to this country. I think it's a great thing. As I've said 1,000 times before, thank you, our Indian friends, our Chinese friends, our friends from Greece, our friends from Italy, and elsewhere, for finally liberating us from a future based on English food. think about it. I mean, or Irish food. And my father, he was English. My mother, she was Irish way back when. And so culinary excellence not being part of either tradition. So it is not just that we love the fact that all these communities have come here and shared the diversity of something as basic as a good meal together, but frankly it's all the other stuff which comes along as well. We think that's really interesting. Why does that happen? And so what I'm saying to you all is that we have actually managed in our own uniquely Australian way, perhaps more by accident than design, decided that the best way in which people are made to feel welcome in this country is not to force them to be Australians, whatever that means, but allow people to evolve. And guess what? Within a generation it happens, and within 2 generations it's definitely happened. What gives me the greatest cause for confidence and happiness in the world is when I go across the universities today and I see stacks and stacks of Australian kids from multiple ethnic backgrounds. What gives me great confidence today is when I go and have reviewed in my previous positions representatives of our armed forces abroad or at home who are from multiple ethnic traditions. Chinese Australians in uniform, Muslim Australians in uniform, Indian Australians in uniform. And this is how we're doing it. And there's a good way in which we're doing it. Guess what, folks? Around the world, most countries don't do it that way. We actually have something uniquely precious here. We'll have the odd debate at the margins about whether someone's being excessive about this, that, or the other. Fine, these have to be dealt with. But they are not our mainstream. Our mainstream gets on with getting on with each other. And it's a core strength of who we are as Australians. My second point is this. It's not just good for us, it provides us with enormous horsepower as Australians of how we then engage the world. Australians have their faults. I'm acutely conscious of those, and we have our strengths. All those faults I personally share, by the way, so this is no lecture to anybody. Who's Blue News, by the way? I just dropped you. But when we go and engage, there's vast diversity that is the Asian Hemisphere today. The vast diversity. Our closest neighbour, Indonesia, 250 million people, 90% of whom are Muslims. Malaysia, predominantly Muslim. Thailand, predominantly Buddhist. Vietnam, still predominantly Buddhist. China, Buddhist, Christian, atheist. Japan, no religion, Shinto, depending. Korea, a mix of the above. India, Hindu, and Muslims. Pakistan, Muslims. Bangladesh, Muslims. Burma, mix of all the above, depending on where you are. So, when we as Australians, blessed with the great strength of the multicultural family we now have, that we call Australia, engage the region and the world, we can do so with a greater degree of ease than we have ever done so before. I find that when I go to Europe, our friends in Europe today, who by and large still have relatively monocultural societies, though there is change and difference, but relatively monocultural societies when you look at the patterns which have emerged over the last 50 years. When they engage this vast diversity that we call Asia today, they are far less nimble and equipped, usually, than we are to engage in all of its diversity and richness, because what we see in the region is what we've come to know increasingly at home. And this is a good thing. It is not just a passive tolerance of difference, it's actually a keen interest and positive appreciation of difference and a readiness to embrace based on a culture of respect. And finally, what I'd like to say to all of you from different faith traditions and different multicultural traditions is this. The great thing about the future of this country is as follows. Our founding fathers, and they were all men back then in the 1890s, regrettably, they got something really right. When we federated in 1901, they had a huge debate in the 1890s about this being a nation of laws. And so we have not just a tradition of the common law, we don't just have a tradition of a Westminster Parliament and its ability to change the law through a democratic process, and transparently so, We also took another big decision way back then, which is this. We took a decision back then that there shall be no establishment of any religion in this country under law. That's not the case elsewhere in the world, where a religious tradition is often established as the formal, legally recognised religion of the state. In many states in Europe today, that is still the case. In the United Kingdom, that's the case, where the Anglican Church is the officially established church of the United Kingdom. There was a massive debate in the 1890s where the founding fathers and South Australia's participant at the time being Kingston, and Queensland's participant Sir Samuel Griffith, who was after whom my lecture's named. They sat down, they looked at all the Federation papers from the American deliberations after the War of Independence in 1776, as they framed the US Constitution and moved towards 1781, on whether there should be an establishment of religion in the United States. And remember the American experience based on, in large part, Puritan settlers escaping religious persecution in Europe. And then the revolt over taxation and other matters, the success of the Revolutionary War and the rest. And this was a deeply religious society in the United States, a deeply entrenched Christian society. Of course, the American founding fathers couldn't agree on whether they should establish as their religion of the newly founded Republic of the United States of America, whether it should be Episcopalianism, whether it should be the Baptists, whether it should be the Presbyterians, or whether it should be someone else. And so Jefferson, to his eternal credit, Thomas Jefferson, said, well, no one can agree, and there's a fundamental reason why we should never agree, is this should be a nation of laws, not governed by the entrenchment of a particular analysis of faith. Debate was rehearsed again here in this country 100 years later. Not in the 1780s, but in the 1890s. And our founding fathers arrived at exactly the same conclusion. There should be no established religion under law. And that is the other great strength that we have here as Australia. We are all equal under the law. And on questions of faith, there is no preference of one against the other, determined in the 1890s. And we have been an extraordinarily healthy society as a result. Number two, we have about us this tradition of respect, which has emerged and grown and I think become one of our core strengths of who we are as Australians. And beyond that, beyond respect, an ability to absorb the traditions and to consider respectfully the traditions of faith which have come to these shores through successive waves of migration, creating for us an enormous national strength of resilience in ourselves as a community and as a nation, and frankly a strength in engaging the world today. So there are my words of encouragement about where the world goes today and the role of, shall I say, interfaith dialogue within it. But frankly, where interfaith and multiculturalism lie within our own country, to our strength and not to our detriment. I thank you for your attention.
I think we might put this on the table over there. Okay, well thank you indeed very, very much, Kevin, for that wonderful set of thoughts and insights. I only umbrage with you as somebody who's quarter Irish, both orange and green, to say that the Irish make great soda scones. You've given us a fascinating run through on the issues of tolerance, on diversity. You've naturally covered the ground of multiculturalism in that context, which becomes very important in this whole area. And I was mindful of two writers as you were speaking. One, and I should learn to pronounce this fellow's name, I say Slavoj Zizek. I have a horrible feeling that is very bad Slovenian, so my apologies to any Slovenians here. In his book Neighbour, and he writes of the fact that multiculturalism can sometimes be a kind of false tolerance, a false toleration, because it can be nothing other than to keep the other at a distance. In other words, we set aside a framework of multiculturalism, and that is really to have somebody else stay away from it. Now, indeed, you quite powerfully talked about the Australian example, and indeed I think this is where Australian multiculturalism takes an entirely different approach to that. It doesn't take a kind of ghettoising, distancing, separating the other And that becomes an important part of the issue of engagement, of the issue of dialogue. The second author I was thinking of was Amy Chua in her book Day of Empire. And Amy Chua has a proposition that says the great empires of the world have a pathology to them. The pathology is that they flourished at one phase and then they died. And her proposition is that they flourish when they're tolerant, albeit not in the sense that we understand toleration in the 20th century or 21st century, but in sometimes a less benign way, but nevertheless tolerance of a sort. And they died when intolerance came into play in those communities. But that then brings the whole question of what is toleration? What is tolerance? What is dialogue? What is understanding? And that's what this is about this morning. So Kevin, thank you for opening up this discussion this morning, and I'm now going to invite you to have input into this dialogue. I recognise over there, then back there, and then back there. So please, right there. Yes.
Kevin, thank you for your...
Wait, the microphone's coming.
Thank you. Kevin, thank you for your vision and highlighting what I think are the primary contributions that we make as Australians to the dialogue. My name is Michael Traynor, and I sit on the International Committee, the Council for Christians and Jews, and I've just come back from a meeting in London where we've been looking at some of the issues, particularly the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians and how that's really created a rise in anti-Semitism, particularly against the Jewish people. And my question, or my reflection really is out of the issue of the growth in fundamentalism that's occurring in our cultures, in our religions. And I know you're not speaking about fundamentalism, but I do think it has something to say in the sense that it is on the rise. And do you have reflections on how do we address this? How do we address it from our particular religious traditions? How do we create a sane conversation? And my PS, Kevin, is that I've just written a commentary on Luke's Gospel.
For as much as many have set out to record that anyway. Firstly on fundamentalism, it's an interesting measurement question, the extent to which fundamentalism is on the rise, by the way. We assume it is, but it's an interesting measurement question across different societies. I will leave that to historical researchers who've got the data to conclude whether that's the case across all societies, let alone non-Western societies. But yes, there is a factor out there, it's true, and you do see it, and it can become ugly, particularly when it acquires its second attribute, which is militant fundamentalism. And as I said before, at the point at which a religious dogma suggests that you should take up arms against another fellow human being, I think we have a deep, deep problem, which goes against fundamentally the precepts of the faith traditions represented here. So what should we do? That is the core question that you ask. The core response has been for the vast majority of the people of faith to stand up and say no. Often people are silent, and we know what others have said about silence, and when evil triumphs and good men choose to remain silent. I mean, as you probably know, my hero in life is a guy called Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer's view back in the 1930s as quite a conservative Lutheran pastor in Berlin, and ordained in the late 20s. Landed himself a fantastic job as a lecturer in systematic theology at the Berlin Humboldt University, which is right there at Unter den Linden, ready for the career of his life. And then the Nazis come to power in the 1932 elections, through having rigged the elections. And so this guy is then thrust into the ethical challenge of his life, which is how does he take a stand against the state and, frankly, the state church, given that the core part of both the Lutheran and Catholic traditions within Germany was suborned by the Nazi state and used to passively preach a message of not just hatred but racial vilification as well against Jews. And so people like Bonhoeffer just stood up. The thing that strikes me as remarkable is on the day when Hitler delivered his first radio broadcast as Chancellor, Bonhoeffer gets on Berlin radio, different station, to denounce the Führer principle. That takes guts. This guy's just become Chancellor of Germany, representing a seriously extremist political party, seriously thuggish in its behaviour even then. And he had the guts to speak out, and of course he ultimately, 13 years later, paid for it with his life, 2 weeks before the end of the war, when they hanged him for having participated in the plot to assassinate Hitler. So, speaking out, frankly, so whenever we see anyone invoking a tradition, a religious tradition, which carries with it a message of intolerance, let alone militant intolerance, we've got a responsibility, not just within the Abrahamic traditions, but across all the communities of faith, to speak out. And I'll look for your commentary.
Question back there, just there.
Mr. Rudd, after hearing you speak today, with your brevity of knowledge over a wide field other than religious issues, I think that you need to be Prime Minister of Australia as soon as possible.
I think I've made my position on that very clear in public debate. Next question.
Out the back, there was something back here.
Yes, sure, mate.
Something in light of quickly. Thank you to our respected something in light of rain, and just quickly, thank you, Mr. Rudd, for your message today. But I would just like to point out you are in South Australia, and that we have not only had English food. Right from the very beginning, George Fife Angus, a Baptist, brought many German settlers to Australia, rescued from the situation.
So we got sauerkraut too.
Yes, that's right. And I must also mention
I kind of rest my case. But
yes.
The wine is terrific. Not a big fan of sauerkraut.
Yes, and I've also read and studied Luke's Gospel from beginning to the end.
Somebody should introduce Kevin to our wonderful methods.
That was in the original language.
It also comes from the German. Back over here, thanks.
Yeah, German Wurst is good. The Blutwurst is what I have problems with as well. Yes, mate.
Thanks very much, Mr. Kevin Rudd, for your words of wisdom. Thanks a lot. Sit down. Thank you. I think I just thanked you for the words of wisdom. You spoke about the peace, harmony amongst the religious beliefs. When we talk about Islam, mostly it's, people understand it's either Shia or Sunni sects, but there are more than 70 sects of Islam. And I represent one of them, and that is Ahmadiyya Muslim community in South Australia, and in general we have a pretty large understanding in the whole of the Australia. I would like to read a small word of the person who basically revived the true spirit and religious beliefs of Islam, Prophet Muhammad. And that's what the true Islam is. Not the Islam which we always see in media and everywhere. And that is, the principle to which we adhere is that we have kindness at heart for whole of mankind. If anyone sees the house of a Hindu neighbor on fire and does not come forward to help extinguish the fire, most truly I declare that he does not belong to me. If any one of my followers, having seen someone attempting to murder a Christian, does not endeavor to save him, I most truly declare that he does not belong to us. And that is the word of Islam. That is the true word of Islam.
And they're great words too. Thank you for reading them to us.
Thank you. It was inspirational listening to you. My partner and I, a couple of years ago, were part of a small group developing a faith-friendly charter with other academics and politicians, which could be used by any organisation to form the basis for reflection about how they applied the very principles that you were in fact talking about, mutual respect, understanding, etc. And I like good news stories, and just this morning I heard about a school that had picked this one up and was running with it. Their students themselves were working out how they did it, their way, in their school, and I thought that was terrific. There is also in Adelaide, Flinders University, which runs a group called Oasis, which is a multicultural, multi-faith meeting place, tremendously successful. And the big thing that they meet over is food.
One of the great wisdoms, I think, which come from the faith traditions, which your intervention reminded me of then, is, at its best, what do the faith traditions teach us? The faith traditions cause us to reflect on another person as a human being full of their own intrinsic worth, as opposed to being an object. And beyond that, in terms of some of the other faith traditions, all life forms. This is quite a profound non-materialist insight into human beings. So if we removed all doctrinal considerations to one side, which has kept theologians busy for 4,000 years, we'll probably resolve by afternoon tea. The bottom line is this core value which faith traditions bring is, as was reflected just now by the reading from the prophet, is this human being, this Hindu or this Christian, has an intrinsic worth which goes way beyond his or her material worth or their utility as an object. And that is quite profound. And if we can harness that collectively in an age which seeks to diminish the intrinsic worth of human life, sometimes, then I think we are a better community of human beings as a result.
Question down here. There, yes.
Thank you very much. I just want to say I feel a bit like an imposter. I don't belong in any religious group. That doesn't mean that I don't have a beliefs.
That's good.
And right now, why I'm here, because I want to hear from other people, from those many communities, how they feel, not about the tolerance, but about the respect. And secondly, because I feel privileged to be in the same room with that gentleman, and actually with all three of them. Thank you very much for being here. I would like just to say what you said, it's exactly how I feel. Tolerance, it's not good enough for me. I do feel I don't have a leader. I have to judge myself. And when I go to bed in the evening, I have to feel that I done my best. If I done mistake, I have to make a better tomorrow. And I have to respect everybody around me. Doesn't matter what religion they are, I respect their beliefs. I don't have one. But to me, that's my responsibility as a human being. And I feel I'm first human being before anything else, nationality, color, or whatever. And if leaders of the religious leaders are more than religious leaders, they are leaders. If they put that in their mind, that they are responsible for everybody around, not only around that flock, which belong in their church. And we are very, very lucky country, because with all those religions, all those nationalities, look at it around. We are peaceful and loving country. And I hope that people will remember that and don't bring some minority, because those problems, look at it around, could be 150 of them, each of them different. Just think about it, we are all together in here and make it better. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, you're not an imposter. Be very welcome. And as I said, people of faith, people not of faith. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you. I really appreciated your words of inclusiveness. Bonhoeffer said, not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act.
That's true.
I love that. I think about a passive tolerance, which sometimes can lead to an intolerance and a sense of not my problem. I would like to think that we could move towards a sense of intentional welcome, because the people that I work with on the streets, when they come to Australia, they don't know how to rent a house. They don't know what to do in the middle of the night if their child is sick. They don't know how to enroll their child in a school. They don't know how to support their child to bring them in a different system with a different discipline bias. How to bring them, equal to the other people. So what we do is we started a community organisation called RAW, Random Acts of Welcome. This is interfaith, intercultural, where we exchange culture. One of our first questions is, what was your first night like in Australia? And that gives us such a beautiful chance to then speak about the acts of welcome. Somebody said, I was picked up at the airport by an Indian taxi driver, and they took me home for 2 weeks. What a beautiful, beautiful way to be welcomed in Australia. Other people say, I've been locked in my house for 3 months, a Muslim lady. She said, I was too scared to go out. We took them to the beach and got surf life-saving to introduce swimming to make them safe. Random acts of welcome is not something that I would like to increase numbers here. What I want to say is there a way that each of us can practice an intentional welcome to our neighbour? The community centres are free. If you invite people to come and bring something and share a meal, that is free. And that is such a learning experience. So in terms of intolerance to active welcome, thank you for your words.
Welcome sounds wonderful, and I might also draw attention to Pastor Brad Chilcott here, who established Welcome to Australia, which is a wonderful, virally growing movement around Australia, built on the same principles and values back then. Next question is here, then I have up the back, in the middle, and then down the front, and I think that might be about it.
Just before that question is asked, you're absolutely right. The power of social transformation doesn't lie with folks like me in political life. It lies with all of you, all of us, I should say, in the community. And your ability to transform a person's life by the simple random act of smiling, by being welcoming, and doing something unexpected. I mean, the parable of the Good Samaritan doesn't exist for fun, even though that person is in dire distress. And the parable of the Good Samaritan in the Christian tradition is alive in all of the faith traditions. I go back to my point before about, frankly, there are common ethics which transcend the faith traditions. And so therefore, acting and giving voice, as the good pastor apparently is doing as well, to a social movement, is terrific. We often in this view often this country have a view that social transformation occurs from the top down. We're waiting a long time, you know. The social transformation, when it's really effective, is from the ground up, and it's from people deciding to make a difference in their towns, and their communities, and their churches, and people who just look as though they've walked off the planet Mars, and making them feel welcome. And the other thing is this: it's not just, you know, guardian angel on your shoulder saying you should be charitable. You know, those of us who've been brought up in the Catholic tradition are familiar with those sorts of lectures. It's actually the other side of the experience as well, which is this, that once you do that, the happiest people I find in life are those who are out there giving. The grumpiest people I meet in life are those who are out there taking all the time. or doing nothing. And so it actually enriches your own life enormously. And the great stories of human enrichment are those of social transformation. There's a great saying which comes out of the moral rearmament movement, which you may be familiar with then, which is political change only occurs with social change, and social change only occurs with personal change. And frankly, it's the reverse engineering of that, which is so important. And the most basic thing is this human being having a good day or a bad day, and how can I help? Sorry, sir.
Mr. Rudd, my name is Alec Balayans. My question is this. During your speech, you spoke about the beauties of multiculturalism. What do you make of the statement made by Angela Merkel, whom most probably you've met, the Chancellor
Quite a few times, yeah.
And she made a statement on the 17th of October 2010, and she said, multiculturalism is dead. Well, also, David Cameron, whom most probably you've met, said the same thing on the 5th of February 2011. He said, multiculturalism has failed. Now, how come these two people, very most famous politicians in today's Europe, came up with such stark words?
Well, firstly, I say with a high degree of judiciousness, I need to see exactly what they said in the context in which they said it. It's the first thing I'd say. It's a matter of caution. Secondly, I did say a little more diplomatically before, there are those in Europe in particular who have a particular view of the monoculture. That was a diplomatic way of referring to some of the tensions which you referred to. The third thing, though, I'd say, and respectful of both these political leaders, who I know reasonably well, in fact quite well, is if it is as you've described it, I fundamentally disagree with them. For the reasons I've outlined.
Yeah, at the very back. Hi Kevin, I'm Anton. Thanks very much for coming today. There's been much discussion recently around the consolidation of Commonwealth legislation on anti-discrimination matters, about whether or not there should be exemptions in the legislation for religious organisations. And I was wondering whether you think it's possible for a religious denomination to insist on exemptions to protect the uniqueness of their faith, but also be tolerant and true to the ministry of reconciliation that Paul speaks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Or do you think these things are mutually exclusive?
I always believe in saying up front that I'm about to dodge a question that I'm dodging it. So I'm just dodging that question and answering it because I'm actually not sure right now where the debate is up to between the religious communities on the one hand and the government on the other. So I actually don't want to barge into a discussion which I think is well developed. So I will refrain from making a direct comment on that. The broader principle I would simply articulate is the one that we're all familiar with, and you invoke the wisdom of Solomon in terms of what should be reflected at the political level. These are hard decisions. There's a diversity of faith communities on the one hand, and there's a reality we don't want people to be unfairly discriminated against on the other. These are the two realities, okay? And where does the wisdom of Solomon lie in the middle of that? Not sure, but on the precise state of these negotiations, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Not that I'm an angel. Which person was it?
Mr. Rudd, I warned when you...
Can't hear you.
Is that on?
Better turn it on, mate.
I warned when you spoke of the intrinsic worth of all life. I've spent 40 years, almost, teaching and developing strategies for empathy, which I think is the oil can that makes, that shares the understanding that each of us do have that intrinsic worth. And I wonder about its role as a skill, not as a notion, but as skills And if I may, read what I think is a good analogy of what could happen, what could accelerate the mutuality of all kindred spirits. By looking at, reading you just some feedback that I happened to bring with me from a teacher 20 years ago who was trained in these skills of empathy. This is what she says. Some of the results that I've learned are that children care for each other and me more. There is more calmness around, more understanding, acceptance, and willingness to share and learn. There is less absenteeism, destructiveness, grandstanding, power playing, angry scenes, temper losses from both sides of the desk, in brackets, stealing, graffiti and vandalism, and more sharing and caring, more honesty and willingness to accept each other in life. While it is not all wonderful and rosy, it is certainly a vast improvement on the tone, relationships, academic levels, and attitude in my classroom, but I was not so aware I did not have the skills I have now. Now, this is a bit political because I've twice tried to contact or send information to Minister of Education currently, and I've had no response over 2 or 3 years to acknowledge or at least want to talk about how the hell can we get that kind of quality in all classrooms and beyond through the nation and through the globe.
I'm a great fan of Adam Smith. Adam Smith is not some right-wing economist. Adam Smith actually authored 2 fundamental volumes, the first of which was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, written in the 1750s, and then 25 years later, The Wealth of Nations, for which he's most commonly known, which explains price theory in modern economics. But Smith always described himself as a moral philosopher, not an economist, not a political economist, and certainly not a political theorist, but a moral philosopher. Essentially, Smith's conclusion was along these lines. Human beings are both other-regarding and self-regarding. That both these dimensions exist within us. That any casual observation of a human being's behaviour over a period of time will demonstrate other-regarding behaviour, that is, what you would describe as empathy, and self-regarding behaviour. I've got to go out there and collect some food for me and my family. Therefore, the reason I say that, and that's kind of my sort of philosophical premise in my attitude to political life, is that human beings aren't saints and not all sinners either. They're sort of somewhere up the middle. And that's deeply wired into them. I mean, all you folks will go home, you'll be concerned about who's going to put out the garbage tonight, who's going to make the meal, and who's going to buy the shopping the next day. These are very self-regarding questions. They're not bad because they're self-regarding, that's just part of our condition. You go out there and you start up a business, you earn money, profit. That's self-regarding activity as well. I'm all for it, should be more of it. I'm also for other regarding activity and behaviour, like raw, like making the stranger feel welcome, and how you welcome the stranger into our midst, particularly those who come here for the first time. So my point is, I think in kidsters, little ones, empathy is actually a natural condition. Therefore, as well as sometimes selfish behaviour, our job is to, when we see empathy emerge from a kid, is to encourage it, to embrace it, and to say that in fact empathy and compassion is not a sign of human weakness, it's the greatest sign of human strength. So we're not dealing with some blank tablet, let alone are we dealing with somebody who is fundamentally selfish in their natural predisposition. We're dealing with a mix, but that's how we're kind of made. I think it's the active encouragement of that side, and I do see it in the schools of my own community in Brisbane, where I come from, that the teachers are going to say, really good at this in our primary schools, at encouraging kids to care for other kids. Now, on a systemic level, I don't have a practical response to your proposition as to how that is more formally inculcated into school curriculum. I can give you one moral tale, though, which is a little cautionary. I have a granddaughter, her name is Jessica. She's 9 months old. She's cute. She's our first grandchild. Her name's Josephine, her mother's Jessica. So Josephine has her first play date recently with a 12-month-old. And I've never seen such a fracas in my life as the fight that broke out over the toys. This was morally and theologically instructive for me. Given this little possum of ours has always been taught to care and share so far. I assume the other child was as well, but it wasn't exactly the United Nations at work.
Mr. Rudd, my name's Ross Phillips, and I'd like to thank you very much for your contribution. And like a previous speaker, I was greatly warmed by the feelings of love and goodwill from all the people of different faith backgrounds here. But of course we know those core values of love for your neighbour are not necessarily the only values. And I don't know whether you're going to dodge this question.
Sounds like it. Just thought I'd throw that flare up there early.
But what should governments do about calls for government recognition of Sharia law and Sharia courts?
I answered this question, I'll answer it very directly. And I answered this at a meeting of the Crescent Institute in Sydney only 4 or 5 days ago. Is that speech of mine up online?
Yep.
Yeah, go and have a look at it. And is the Q&A up online? Okay. Can't remember. Oh, well, no, the Sharia law question was in the Q&A. This is with Sydney's several hundred senior Muslim business leaders. And I spoke about some of the things I've spoken to today, but as well as about their role in the modernisation of our economy. But I was asked this question, and I went back to what I said to you before. In 1890, we decided there shall be no establishment of any religion, Christian or otherwise. And for me, that means, therefore, that we should be one nation under the common laws of the Commonwealth of Australia. We should be blind to any person's faith position. That's where I come from. And that is not to prefer Jew or Greek or Christian or Muslim or anyone else. And I think there's something deeply wired into most Australians to say, yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good thing. In fact, we prefer it that way. It's respectful. And so that would be my response to that. And I will certainly not support any proposal by Lynn for the reintroduction of the Spanish Inquisition either.